Shape. Hi guys, we continue to get acquainted with Photoshop tools, and so we finally got to the vector graphics tools. Yes, despite the fact that Photoshop is a raster program, vector graphic tools are also presented here. And now we will talk about them. I think you have seen many photos in which there are various kinds of geometric elements. This is especially common in designer products, in various posters, flyers, and similar things. Most of these interesting elements were created with vector graphic tools. And let's move on to them. To demonstrate these tools, I first decided to take this flyer as a background, because such kind of products usually have elements of vector graphics. I hope that you remember from our third lessons how a vector image differs from a raster one, and its most important difference is that when the scale changes, the quality of vector elements doesn't change. It is especially important when you need to print polygraphic products and the tint blocks, and text must be represented by vector elements. By the way, a tint block is something like this. That is, it is a certain space which is intended to be filled with some text. In an absolutely ideal situation, all vector elements should be added to your project in the vector graphics software. Nevertheless, at the sketching stage, it may often be more convenient for you to use vector graphics elements directly in Photoshop. And of course, there are designs like this, for example, where it is necessarily better to edit all the elements of vector graphics directly in Photoshop. As you gain experience in various design softwares, you'll eventually understand where and what is better to use. And in Photoshop, the elements of vector graphics are represented by 4 groups. The first one is a group of shapes. Next are the path and the direct selection tools, which help to work with these shapes and with other textures that will be created with pen group tools. There are a lot of them, and each of them is frequently used. Well, the last group of tools related to vector graphics is the text group. At the same time, the last 2 types of text, which are masked texts, do not belong to vector graphics, but we'll get to them later. And now let's move on to the shape tool, which is located here. Let's choose the rectangle tool and consider the settings that are common for some other vector tools. Let's go to the top menu. And what do we see? First, if we look at this window, we will see that there are 3 types of rectangle vector tools: shape, path, and pixels. What are they for? If we choose a shape, then I draw such a thin block, filled with some color, something like that. Moreover, if we look now in the layers menu, each new shape is drawn automatically on a new layer. Here, let me draw another one. You see, a third layer immediately appeared, which is called rectangle 3. Next, let's choose a path. In this case, we just draw a path like this. Here I hope you can see it clearly now. This path can be used for a variety of purposes. For example, we can create a selected area. To do this, we can go to the Paths palette. Here we have an activated working path, and click this icon. After that, we have a selected area that we can copy to a new layer. It is better to switch to the foreground layer before doing it. Well, here we have a rectangle cut out. Well, let's make it visible, so that we have something like this. So, of course, you could create a rectangular area much faster using rectangular selection, but sometimes you need to create rather complex shape areas. For example, it could be any geometric shape at all: a star, a triangle, gear, some element of an ornament, absolutely anything. But we'll talk later about how you can distort the basic shapes and what you can do with them. In the meantime, we'll get back to our settings. We have already talked with you about the shape and about the path. And let's look at the third position, which is called pixels. And to make it clear, let's go to the layers palette. If you pay attention, then there is such an icon, or the thumbnail of each layer, which shows that the shape you created is vector, and when you change the scale, it will preserve its qualities as much as possible. But if you choose pixels, then see what happens. I create a new layer and draw another square on it. That's what I have on layer 2. At the same time, we don't have such an icon. It happens that it is necessary to create some kind of geometric shape element that wouldn't be a vector figure, because there are such operations that not applicable to vector shapes. For example, let's now take an eraser and try to erase the raster shape that we have on the layer 2. Well, as you can see, everything is perfectly erased. And now let's choose this vector square and take the eraser tool. And as you can see, it's just not active, because we can't use an eraser here. But if we still really want to use the eraser, and we have already created a vector shape, then we can always convert it into a raster one. To do this, right-click on the layer and choose to rasterize layer. After that, the icon that indicates that this is a vector shape disappears, and we can safely use the eraser. Let's summarize a little. We have 3 modes: shape, path, and pixels. In the shape mode, a vector shape filled with some color. In a path mode, we create a path, and pixel mode, we create a geometric shape, but it will be a raster shape. A special additional icon appears on the layer icons when creating vector elements. But we can always convert a vector shape into raster one, but the reverse action is impossible. But let's move on. Now in front of you is a picture, and let's take a tool that we call an ellipse, with which you can draw a ball, and at the same time we'll consider some more operations. So we choose a shape. Now we look further. Then we'll have fill and stroke. Let's leave it as it is for now. If we choose fill option, we can set some color. And if we choose stroke, we can also set some color. Now we have a white fill. And at the same time, this button, which is called solid color, is active. Let's draw a circle. If you press shift at the same time, it will be correct, but you need to press it after you have started drawing. We'll get a white circle. But in the same window, we can choose another color, either from the proposed sets, or we can go to the color palette and choose some color there. Or we can click somewhere on our picture with an eyedropper, and this color will also be displayed. If we don't want to have a solid color, then we can select the none option, and then our shape turns into a path. We can choose a gradient and fill this shape with a gradient. You already know everything about the gradient, and we can choose to fill with a pattern. But let me still choose the absence of a fill, because I prefer in this case to make a stroke. We click stroke and see that the settings are absolutely identical. And let me choose the color or the stroke. Let's take this one for example. Yes, here we can look at the thickness of this stroke and make it thicker or thinner. It depends on how we like it more. Let's make it like this. Next we can choose the parameters of the stroke, and it can be not only solid, but for example dashed or dotted. If we have a dashed or dotted stroke, then we can also align the corners. But of course, this applies to the rectangle tool, and other parameters allow us to change the distance between the strokes. For example, see how it changes right away. That is, we can arbitrarily create a stroke that we like. Let's leave a line like this. Let's move on to rectangle tool again. Look, if I click now, then I have a window in which I can immediately set some dimensions that I need. For example, I will click cancel and draw by hand. And look, the same operation. I go here, and we can firstly change the location of the stroke. It can be from the center. It can move outside. If we have a line tool, we can change the ends. And here we can change the angles. For example, we can make them rounded like this, or beveled like this. So I will return everything to the settings that were at the very beginning. And I will delete this rectangle by deleting the layer on which it is located, like that. And let's try to draw our ball. Let's take the rectangle tool and draw something like this. This will be the place where the rope is attached. I press Ctrl+T in order to slightly change the proportions and press enter. And now I'm going to do the following. I will cancel the stroke like this and choose a stroke. Here we have such a wonderful rectangle, and I will draw another one, which will be surf or rope. So we can move it all. Note that I have each of these elements on a new layer. And now I would like to align these elements. Let's imagine that I got them all crooked somehow. Well, like this, for example. And I would like to have a straight ball. To do this, I select all the layers on which I have elements using the shift. And look, in the top menu I have an active panel that is responsible for alignment. And it is easy to guess exactly how this alignment will occur. I choose to align horizontal centers. And look, everything worked out. And your homework will be to draw a ball, like this. We will continue our talk about standard shapes. And right now, you see the design that was created with the help of these shapes. Open Photoshop. And now, on the example of this image, we'll get acquainted with the rounded rectangle and line tools. It is located here, and we will try to refine the original image given in this look. adding a couple of elements to it. I have the shape mode turned on now, and I'm going to take a tool called a round rectangle. And I start drawing, and see what kind of rectangle I get. If we zoom in the image now, we'll see that the corners are rounded. And we start working with the tools of this group. A palette called Properties is always open, and here we can see the characteristics of the shape that we have drawn. In particular, we can see here the radius of rounded corners. And if I now click on this lock here, set 100 pixels and press enter, then you see right away that my corner has rounded much more. But at the same time, all the other corners have rounded too. By the way, the advantage of this palette is that you can edit the shape after it is created at any time. You just need to select the desired layer, open the Properties palette, and here you can change different parameters. Well, let's say I would like to round corners with different radius. Well, I would like to get something like this. Let's try to do it. In order for this to be possible, it is necessary to make this lock inactive. So I set 300 for this corner and press enter. The corner has rounded off. And for example, I can round off these corners even more. For example, 50 and 50. That's the shape we got. Now let's cancel the fill and we'll make a stroke. Well, for example, like this. As for the other properties of this tool, it is completely identical to the properties that we went through in the last lesson. The difference is only in the rounding of the corners. Let's slightly reduce the size of this shape in order to leave room for the arrow, which we will draw using the line tool. Free transform, and I reduce it a little. Probably let it be like this. Let's move on to the line tool. I am creating a new layer now. And as you have already understood, it draws lines. And the only difference between it and other tools is that the thickness of this line can be set. The thickness of this line right now is 20 pixels. And there is also a gear here that allows us to create arrows. But let's cancel all the values set here now and just draw a line. That is, I just draw a line and I get 20 pixels in white. If I want to draw a strictly vertical or strictly horizontal line, then it is necessary to hold down the Shift key. So I press Shift and I get a strictly vertical or strictly horizontal line, or a line at an angle of 45 degrees. Look at its dimension in the pop-up window. You see the level under which this line is drawn, so I drew it. By the way, if you hold down Shift before drawing the shape, then all the shapes will be drawn on the same layer, which is what I have now. If I wanted these lines to be on different layers, I had to start drawing a little, and then press Shift. This way I would have a straight line. And look, it's already on a new layer. Now again, I have already started drawing a little bit by pressing Shift, and the line is on a new layer again. Here is a small nuance. So I'm going to delete all these lines that we have drawn. And let's see how we can make an arrow out of them. To do this, we click on the gear. And look, here you can set wherever the arrow will be at the beginning of drawing, or maybe both at the beginning and at the end. Well, for example, I set both at the beginning and at the end, and then I draw an arrow, and I get it like this. Also in the same menu, you can change the shape of the arrow tip. And look how its tip has changed. And draw an arrow. Look what an arrow we got. And let's set the canvasity of 50, and you see how the tip has changed. That is, you can experiment completely arbitrarily with these parameters, with their settings. Create the types of arrows that you like best. I'll create another one, 500, 1000 and 50%. To be honest, I like this type of arrows the most, but it already depends on what your preferences are. I recommend that you practice with these parameters and see which arrows you will get. Well, in this block, which we got on the left, theoretically it would be possible to place some text, but we haven't yet passed the text. If you want, you can save this picture and practice with the text in the future. Let's move on to the polygon tool. Now select this tool and look at its settings. The difference of this tool is that we can set the number of sides. For example, we now have 5 sides, and we can draw a pentagon like this. And if we make, for example, 3, then there will be a triangle or some other shape. Here is a figure with 12 sides, but there are additional features here too. We go into the gear and select, for example, the star mode and set 12 sides, and we get such a wonderful star. we can change the depth of the rays and draw the star again. And the star has become completely different. And in this case, we will get a star like this. And we can also smooth out the outer corners. And then we will get a flower like this. We can apply it in some design. And so, let's say we created some kind of shape that we liked. Well, for example, this flower. We can increase the depth of the rays. And we will make another flower. Here, let's say we got such a flower and we want to keep it. We want to use it in the future. And then we can do this. We go into Edit and select Define Custom Shape. We define, we give it some name, and click OK. Now, if you select Custom Shape tool and click on this arrow, then at the very end there will be the shape that we created. And we can use it for a variety of purposes. For example, we can create a texture with our flower. To do this, I have now created a new file with a size of 500 by 500 pixels and placed our shape, our flower, in the center of this file. And now you need to go into Edit and select Define a Pattern. OK. And let's see how our pattern will work. I am creating a new file, but this time we'll probably create a large file, let's say 5000 by 5000. And I want to make a fill. I choose the fill and the pattern. And at the very end, we have our flower. I select it and click it. And look at how wonderful our file is filled up with flowers. Of course, the flowers can be of very different colors on different backgrounds. It can even be filled with gradient fill. That is, you can actually create very interesting composition with standard shapes. Let's now look at the last tool from this group, which is called a custom shape. This is a very interesting tool in the sense that there are a large number of different shapes that you can use by default. And of course, when you open the software, there are not all the shapes that you can use, but you can click on the gear icon and choose what you like from the suggested list. Here you can find a very interesting variety of shapes. Among other things, if you look closely at this menu, you will see already familiar positions that affect the size of thumbnails and Preset Manager. The Preset Manager works exactly the same as for brushes and gradients. And in the same way, you can upload, create and save your shapes, which you, for example, downloaded from the internet. Let's take some shape, and that's what I get. So, use it with pleasure. And now, let's see another example of how these shapes or any other vector shapes can be applied. Let's choose a path mode. I go to the layer with the girl, which is at the top. Below I have a background that we'll also need. And I draw holding down Shift. In order to somehow change the position, we can use the Path Selection tool. This is such a black arrow. Well, for example, let it be like this. And now we'll create a mask. To do this, I press the Ctrl key and click on the mask icon. And I get a vector mask. Thus, the background, which is located at the bottom, became visible to me, and the area outside is hidden. If we click on the mask, then we can change its characteristics in the Properties palette. For example, we can do feathering, and then, as you can see, the edges become blurred, like this. If we reduce the density, we will see a little bit of the background that we had around the mask. This is not all the possibilities that the tools of the shape group provide us with, but we'll look at the rest of them in the next lesson. And now let's move on to the homework. Your first task will be to take this file or any of your files that you like and create some kind of design in which there would be arrows and rectangles with rounded corners. But perhaps you can create other shapes from this group. As a second task, I suggest you create your own shape. Maybe a flower, maybe a star, maybe even there will be 2 or 3 shapes. You can combine them in some way. Change their colors. Put them on a background of different colors. Then you need to create your own texture. Create a square. I had, if you remember, 5000 pixels by 5000 pixels. And then you need to fill the square with your texture. And the last task will be to create a vector mask using the custom shape tool. You can choose any one you like. Of course, I'll add the files that I used in additional materials, but you can take some of your photos that you like, choose the shapes that you like, and use these shapes to create a mask and something creative. We continue to talk about vector graphic tools, about the tools of the shape group, and now you see the image which background was created with the help of these tools. Let's see what other operations we could do with them, so that you have more opportunities in your work. But now let's move from retro posters to printed products, because various kinds of geometric shapes which can be created with the help of these tools are very often used here. I have already made such a blank with 3 shapes that were created with a rectangle tool. Let's see what can be done with them, and we will now consider the tools of this group. There are 2 arrows, black and white. If we choose a black arrow, then we can take the path we have chosen and moving it using this arrow in a way we like. Here, for example, I take it and drag. This action is similar to the operation of the move tool, but it applies to the actor shapes. But the second white arrow allows to change the path of the shape itself. It is called direct selection. That is, if the first arrow is the selection of the path as a whole, and let's say its movement, then the white arrow is a direct selection. Let's see how it works. Take the white arrow and look, I'm going to switch to this rectangle. If I click on the corner, then I have these 4 anchor points at the corners of our rectangle, and I can already do something with them. For example, I can pull this point and somehow move it. I will get something like this, for example. I can select 2 points at once by holding down the Shift key, and in this case I can pull on this bottom side and make, for example, a parallelogram from our rectangle. That is, with this tool you can click on any anchor point, which is usually located somewhere on the corners, and change the location of this particular point. Let's see what tools we have that allows us to work with the path of our shape. Let's go to the group of tools, which is called the pen tool group. We'll consider the pen again. This is a mega important tool, and you should know how it works if you want to be a real professional in Photoshop. Now we'll consider only the 3 lower tools of this group. We'll start with a tool called Edit Anchor Point. As you have already understood, the points are located at the corners are just the same anchor points. And now, if we point the pen to our path, then we have a plus icon that allows us to put an additional anchor point. That is, we'll create another anchor point in addition to those that we have formed automatically at the corners of our shape. I click in the center of this lower side, and look, I have an additional point. If I want to move this point somehow, I have to select it. In this case, I take the already familiar white arrow, select the point, click on it, and it becomes blue. And let me use the arrows on the keyboard to move it down. I press the arrow and hold it without letting go, and I get this kind of thing. If you noticed, such direction lines were formed on the sides of this point. And if I pull one of the lines, I can change the direction of the curve that I got. For example, I take this line, move here, and I get this path. I take this line, move it here, and the path becomes like this. It could be done, for example, like this. I can twist it. As you see, it fit. An additional point automatically takes exactly this form, but sometimes we need to create a sharp angle. In this case, we go to the pen group tools, and at the very bottom we have the convert point tool. We select it and click on our point, and we get this arrow. If I click again and try to pull my hand to the left, then I'll again have the same direction lines, and we'll be able to create such a curved line again, and another click creates an angle again. And in order to move it, we have to take the direct selection, the white arrow, and then we can move it somehow. I use the same arrows on the keyboard and raise this point up, and now I'll get a kind of flag. That's how it looks like. Let's now move on to the rectangle that I have on the left and consider the option of removing the anchor point. To do this, we'll take a pen with a minus sign. I took it, and look, when I point the cursor to a point, I have a pen icon with a minus sign. I can click on the point, and of course, the point disappears immediately. Thus, you can edit and remove points, creating the most diverse shapes that you can think of. And with the white arrow tool, you can select the points you need and move them in the right direction. I have done it. So, let's move on to the white rectangle, and for example, we can select 2 of these points with the Shift key, and we can stretch our white rectangle in this way, or in some other way. Let's do it like this. And so, we got some kind of composition that can be used as a template for some kind of flyer. Let's consider how we can eventually distribute the shapes we have created in space. Let's create arrays like this. The operation that we are going to do now refers to free transformation, and now to standard shape, but it's most convenient to show this operation on the example of standard shapes. And in general, It is most often used with them. Let's go. Let me take a custom triangle shape now. If you don't have it, then you can go here to Gear and select everything. Then surely you'll have this triangle. So I already have it. And now I'm going to draw such a triangle, which somewhat goes beyond the boundaries of my canvas. I will place it approximately in the center. Then I press Ctrl+T. After that, I make a copy of the layer by pressing Ctrl+G. Then I press Ctrl+T to invoke the free transform mode, and I move the center of rotation, relative to which I will have an offset to the top of the triangle. Then I go to the top menu, and here I set the degree by which my triangle will rotate. For me, it will be 10 degrees. And you see, it has immediately rotated. Then I copy the layer again and press Alt+Shift+Ctrl+T and repeat it the required number of times until the result is obtained. That is, just repeat pressing these keys. Now let's talk about how we can distribute objects at an equal distance from each other horizontally or vertically. By the way, this feature has appeared in Photoshop only since 2018. Let me take the polygon tool now and create a new layer, and I will draw a star, like this for example. It is possible to move also with the help of the Move tool, not only with the help of the black arrow. Then I press Ctrl+J and create some more stars, arranged in a chaotic way. That's it. Then I select all the stars that I got, all the layers with stars, by pressing the Shift key. I align them horizontally. You can align them in the center, just like that. And now I need to distribute them. To do this, I click this button and select Distribute horizontally. And as you can see, they all are at an equal distance from each other. Now we can take this whole galaxy of stars and put it, for example, like this. Let's talk a little more about the size. I'm going to take the rectangle tool now. So on the new layer, I'll draw some kind of block, like this. Immediately a palette of properties has appeared. There are its dimensions in width and height. It is clear that we can align all this relative to the stars. Well, let's say we'll have some text in this text block. And for example, we want to create a text block. Below that will be twice as short and twice as high. And we want this to be exactly the exact numbers. To do this, we take the rectangle that we already have and copy it. So I made a duplicate layer. And now of course I can move it lower. And look, the most interesting thing is that this opportunity has appeared in Photoshop only since 2018. I could of course mentally divide it by 2 and type 400, but if I had some kind of figure, that is not very convenient for a long count. Then you can make calculations directly in Photoshop. I put a division sign and divide by 2, enter, and look, the width immediately decreased by half. I can do the same for height, only in this case I multiply by 2 and my height has also doubled. And now I just have to align these objects the way I need. I select both, and if I need to, I align them on the left edge or in the center. You can even align them relative to the stars, but it seems to me that it looks better on the left edge somehow. Since 2018, it has become possible to do calculations in Photoshop, and it's possible to do this not only in the Properties palette, but in all places where you will have any numbers. And this of course greatly facilitates the work of graphic designers in situations where some clear dimensions and clear proportions are needed. And if you have an early version, then unfortunately this option isn't available. And now let's look at the operation that allows us to edit another shape to one, subtract a shape from a shape, and so on. Let's draw a circle for example. I take the ellipse tool, press Shift and draw a circle. Now I want to have star-shaped hole in the center of the circle. I need to draw a star on the same layer on which I have a circle. If you remember, we usually create each new vector shape on a new layer, but now there is an exception. I take the polygon tool, hold down Shift and draw a star. Look, I have a star drawn on the same layer, but now it is here. Now I can place the star the way I need it. I take a black arrow, click on the star and move it, for example like this. And now we take the black arrow and click on the star. The star is selected. Go to the top menu. We choose to subtract front shape, and we got this kind of thing. All other options on this menu work exactly the same as it worked for these selected areas. Therefore, I will not consider all these things, because it's completely analogous. And I think you should understand. If suddenly the shapes on a layer are drawn not in the sequence in which you would like, then you can go to this menu and move the shape as you need. That is, if I drew for example a circle after a star, then I could then select a circle and remove the shape in the background. Let's talk about homework now. In the first part of this lesson, we talked with you about the possibilities of adding and removing points, as well as moving them. I recommend you practice doing this. And of course, you can just repeat what I did. But it will be much better if you try to create your own design. The information will get used much better. If you are going to try to solve some design task that you have set, and if you are going to make Photoshop your profession, then in the future this work can become part of your portfolio. Moreover, very soon we will be going through the text tool, and you'll be able to supplement this design with text. The second homework task will be to work out the operations that I showed on the example of this exercise. And in the same way, you can either simply repeat what I did or try to create your own composition. I didn't show the process of creating some complicated poster because it would take much longer, but I think that those who are interested in it can quite try to do it themselves, and in this case all the skills will be acquired much better, and I look forward to see your work. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time.